Art Merrill. It's Artmerrill. And I'm reading his bio. It says, I have been an entrepreneur and business owner since I was 5 years old, carrying groceries for the elderly women in my apartment building for a quarter. I have spent 40 years reading and digesting self-help and personal finance books while owning and running several small but profitable businesses. Currently, I live just outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I have a wonderful wife, 3 amazing kids, and a large extended tribe that keeps both my house and my heart full at all times. I decided to start writing and sharing my experiences and knowledge with others because I saw how many folks were struggling from a lack of financial knowledge that our educational institutions are not able to provide. I spent several years working for a financial services firm, working directly with many families and seeing firsthand how badly they were struggling regardless of income or formal education levels. I want to use what I know to help as many folks as I can because I want others to enjoy the quality of life that I enjoy. Life is too short for anything less. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Reading Circle microphones. Art Merrill. Art, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. I'm humbled and honored to be with you this morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm humbled and honored that you accepted the invitation to join me. Thank you for joining me. We'll do it both ways. So we're going to talk this morning. We're going to predominantly about kind of like your book, Why Not You? The Old Man's Guide to Prosperity. Now, one of my first questions that I usually ask is, okay, now, did you originally set out to be an author? Is writing or reading something you loved to do whenever you were a youngster, or did that come later in life, or where did this whole writing come about?
Well, from the time I was about 11 years old, I had an intense curiosity about how money worked. It was about that age when I realized that, you know, we struggled a lot. I was raised by a single mother, so of course we struggled financially. But about 11 years old is when I really started to understand that not all families struggled as much as we did. So from 11 on, I started buying books. I had paper route before school, paper route after school. I sold gum and candy in school, which is a story that's in the book. But what I used the money for, besides, you know, of course, buying pizzas for my friends, is I bought books. Books about money, books about sales, books about stocks, real estate, mutual funds, anything I could get my hands on from the time I was 11 years old. So, you know, I wanted to know how money worked.
That's interesting because at that age, usually kids are not necessarily focusing on money, at least not from that perspective. I mean, the perspective the kids that age focus on money is asking for it, not necessarily studying it. So I find that fascinating, that at that early of an age, you were kind of like trying to figure out, how does this thing called money work?
Yeah, and I think probably a lot of it had to do with the fact that at that time it was my mother, myself, being 11, and I had a younger sister who was 3 years younger than me, actually to the day. So being the oldest child, I had a lot more exposure to the fact that we were struggling. My mother really never made it a secret how badly we were struggling. So I was probably more involved in the family finances than most kids are at that age. Most kids at that age really don't know what their parents have, how they're doing financially. But in my family, we spoke about it. It was, especially, of course, when it came to asking for money. You know, we had all the same sayings that a lot of families have. You know, money doesn't grow on trees. We can't afford that. You know, I'm not made of money. So I was more acutely in tune to our finances probably than most kids at that age.
Now, I remember as a child, because I find it interesting in your bio, you're saying the educational institutions don't provide, and they really don't. Now, I know here in New Jersey, a bill was just passed where the finance education would now be included in the curriculum. But this is 2019, and that bill was just passed. So, but I do remember also as a child, whenever I was in school, we did have this thing. We used to call it banking. And that's where I guess a local bank or national bank, for that matter, partnered with the school system or whatever. And it encouraged children to save. Like we had our own little passbook, bank book and everything. And we would take money to school and put it in our little accounts and they would keep record. So from that standpoint, it was there. But from the point of like you were talking about investing in stocks and mutual funds and all, that was not around or talked about for children. And it's still not that. I mean, we still haven't even really, at this point, got into checking accounts. See, I'm talking from an education perspective because when I'm not doing radio, I'm an educator. So I deal with children, and the school that I'm in is an urban area and a very impoverished area. So the story that you're describing for yourself is probably 90% of the children in my school building. They're single moms, and they're struggling. But in terms of getting, and I share with them a lot of times when I'm in conversation with them, that use your situation. And sounds like what you did. And what you did is what I'm trying to encourage the students that I work with to do. Use the situation as fuel to better yourself, to say, all right, it may be like this now, but I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure it's not like this always.
Exactly. And what I try to teach people and to convey to them is the fact that you're starting with zero or possibly even less than zero will make your story when you succeed all that much more impressive. Nobody's really all that impressed with people who start with a lot, who somehow manage to keep it. But if you start from nothing, especially if you're, you have a single parent, a single mother, using it as fuel is exactly what I try to do, and what I try to convey to people. Instead of feeling bad that you're starting with nothing, first of all, start to think of it in terms of, well, you have nothing to lose.
Right.
One. And second of all, people will be that much more impressed because nobody will be able to say that, well, you started with this or you had the silver spoon in your mouth. So your story will be that much more impressive. Honestly, I wouldn't trade my background, anybody's background, because nobody can say whatever I end up with doesn't belong to me. I did.
Correct.
Because I did.
You're absolutely right. And again, I remember as a kid, because I didn't realize, all right, because the neighborhood I grew up in, all the kids on the block, first off, there were only maybe 2 or 3 families that had mom and dad in the house. And my family happened to be one of them. But the rest of the kids on the block were being raised by single moms or their grandmothers or whomever. And like my house and another kid's house were kind of like the go-to houses for tools and fixing of bikes, because we had dads.
Yeah.
Like I said, the other kids really didn't. So our dads, me and my best friend, our dads kind of became the block dads. And where I'm going with this is I didn't know that we would be considered poor till I was a grown man, because we really didn't discuss finances and money like that. I know I would ask for something and they would say no, just like you just said, money don't grow on trees. We don't have it, yada, yada, yada. But never delved into what money and how it worked. Now, see, as you got older, as I became an older teen, like 18, 19, 20, so different things, like at that time it was called A.L. Williams. Now it's called Prime America. But folks would come and they had the whole thing, buy term and invest the difference and compound interest and so forth. And still it didn't click for me as a teen. Right. But the younger you understand how finances work, the better off or the more prosperous as an adult you can become. Because had I done the compound interest thing in my 20s, I would be that millionaire that I keep wishing for right now. I would have been it if I would have compounded back in my 20s. And interestingly enough, I just started a book called Atomic Habits. And the premise of that book is the same thing as compound interest in terms of improvement. Because the author says if you can improve yourself 1% per day, at the end of the year, you'll be 37 times better. But if you regress 1%, you'll be almost at zero. And your book is kind of saying the same thing in terms of the finances. Like you just said, start with nothing and just build on it.
Exactly. And by the way, I wasn't going to mention Primerica, but that is the company that I'm currently with.
Okay.
And for exactly that reason, it's the only company I know of that actually educates people about how money works. And that's actually one of the foundational things for what I write. And that's because of my background. I was led to them, and I believe that their teachings are really a big part of what I do now. So it's interesting because interesting that you refer to that company because that's really the only one I know of that does what we do for people. So it's really an opportunity for me to. I figured out that at some point I was going to have to do more
Right.
and actually write for people. I was going to actually have to go to their house, sit with them, and actually help them do things because I figured out two things that were really important in the course of my studies. Is one, that not everybody reads books
Right.
like I read books. And number two, there were a whole lot more families on the struggling side of the fence than on the prosperous side. Growing up in our neighborhood, really the reason why 11 was such a pivotal year for me because that was the year that my mother remarried.
Okay.
And we moved basically from the wrong side of the tracks to more onto the right side of the tracks. And I got to see how some more traditional family structures worked. And it did seem to be that the families who had both parents at home did do better. And they had vacations, they had plenty of food, and they did do better. So I really started to see the other side of how that worked. And that really is what got me to thinking about how I wanted to live. So my family, by the way, now is, we have myself and my wife at home. We have, 3 kids. 2 of them are grown, and my niece stays with us now.
Okay.
But our house is the house that you described your house as being. My house is the house now where everybody gathers.
Right.
On Sundays we have sometimes 15, 20 people over. Very few of them actually technically related to us, but still we consider them family.
Right.
So our house has become that house, and we're really happy with that.
And see, all right, now again, I find this fascinating. I'm working my way up to you ultimately writing Why Not You. But I find it fascinating, again, as a child that age, and I was that age, I was that way too at that age in terms of this notion of reading. Not every child, like you just, not every grown-up for that matter, likes to read, but certainly it's somewhat of a difficult sell to get children to read. And yet for some of us, we kind of do it because that's our thing. That's our hobby. So for you, was reading kind of like, as a kid, your thing? And did your classmates or kids you played with, did they think you were dorky or nerdy? Because I know mine did.
Well, maybe a little bit, but I don't think so. I think because my subject matter, the things I read were fairly consistent. I don't read too many books outside of prosperity and investing.
Okay.
I've always thought of my reading time as fairly precious and fairly scarce because you still have to work, you still have to do other things. So I always since I wanted to know everything there was to know about money, I concentrated my reading on that. And I think for some reason, that subject matter probably doesn't come across the same way as just reading maybe fantasy novels or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with reading any kind of books. I'm thrilled with anybody that reads anything. But I think I probably didn't get hassled as much because I think my friends even understood that the reason I was reading these books was so that someday I would be able to be more prosperous. I think they probably respected that.
Now, in terms of, again, for me to talk to you in terms of as someone young like that, focusing on finances, that really does blow me away. And maybe because I was so oblivious to it. There are folks who find the stock market and investing in mutual funds and keeping track of everything, the S&P, the Dow, they find that very difficult. Is it that difficult, or is it something that can be, and that's the premise of the book, something that can be taught?
It is absolutely something that can be taught. And to be perfectly blunt, the workings of the stock market and investing are no more complex than any other type of business, than any other type of profession, any other type of field. I meet people. I have a client now who's a valve technician. He works at a plant. He works on valves. And when I went to see him, he had this manual, this little tiny manual sitting on the table. And I opened it up. And it was written in English, I'm pretty sure. But to me, it looked like it was written in Chinese because it was a technical manual. Now, to me, it didn't make any sense at all. But to him, it was just something he could pick up and look something up and figure out, a measurement or a number. And he understood it perfectly well. The thing with money and investing is the workings are not complex at all. They're very simple, actually. They're almost primitive the way the market works. It's just that the words and the terminology used are different than the terminology and words that we use in everyday life. But it's just like any other profession. If you talk to a teacher, they'll often use, acronyms and abbreviations, which don't mean anything to the rest of us, but to other teachers, it's their language. Same thing with engineers or even cooks or, chefs or landscapers, tree guys, mechanics. Every field has its own language. And money is just another field with another set of words and terminologies. And once you learn those terms, for instance, what an index is, what dividends are, and what, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the actual, the index that measures how the whole market is doing. Once you learn the terminology, then the workings of the investments in the stock market themselves are really, really simple. But that's what I'm trying to encourage. But that's why the book is written kind of simplistically. It's just to get people to start thinking in terms of investing for the future.
No, you know what? You're absolutely right in terms of the jargon. And see, that's the thing. Exactly. Whenever I was saying it's something that can be taught, it's also something that can be learned. It's a matter of, one, you're going to have to focus. It's just like anything else. It's just like learning a language or learning how to play an instrument or anything. You learn, as Art just said, the terminology and what everything and how everything does, and then you kind of stick with it. I think most people fall off the wagon because they don't stick with it. And maybe I'm talking for myself. Like, I started out and then stopped. I started again, stopped. And so maybe that's where a lot of people are. And then there are others that do it faithfully and religiously, and they tend to do better. And
exactly.
Going back now to the point of you writing the book, because this is the other thing. This is a part where what you're doing or what you've done is not only physical, it's also spiritual. And I say that only because it's one thing for you to get what you got and to have kept it or keep it for yourself. Because you said, okay, we were struggling. I learned about money. But you took on the position of, I want to help others. I want to teach others how to do that. How did that come about?
Well, I'm firmly convinced that the way people treat each other in society and in the world is really tied to how people feel about themselves. In other words, when people are expressing hatred or animosity towards others, they often express it in terms of, well, that person is, however, so-and-so, of a different color, a different religion, a different country, whatever. And that's why I'm hostile towards them. But I legitimately believe that the real reason why people are hostile towards others is because they're not happy with their own lives.
Right.
They're stressed. They're stressed. They're not necessarily bad people, but they're under a lot of stress. And most of the time what you find is financial stress. People aren't doing well financially, so that manifests in other ways. So I think if we can start to address that issue of people's personal finances and get more working class people doing better financially and feeling better about their future, their own personal future, and the future of their kids, I think they'll start to relate to other people in a more friendly and welcoming way. And I think it will make a big difference in how we talk to each other. In the political sense, in the social sense, and just in the, in how we talk to each other in general, and I think it'll make a difference if less people are so, financially stressed out. So that's why, and it just happens to be my interest. It's my way of contributing, because it's the one thing I do know something about is money. And I think it's important because it affects all of us.
Absolutely.
There's other factors in society that affect people, but money is the one universal one. So that's when I'm going to do my best to make my contribution in that area.
And you're absolutely right. Now, we always, in many cases, will say it in jest or jokingly whenever somebody says money can't buy happiness, and we say, I tell you what, give me enough money. It may not can buy happiness, but it'll solve a lot of other issues.
Exactly.
I have to pull it back up because I'm a huge fan of this whole thing with Kermit the Frog and None of My Business. And there was one of the memes that said something like, money may not buy happiness, but it'll solve 97% of my problems. It was something along those lines. So I can deal with that other 3% that's left, but 97% will be taken care of.
There you go.
But a lot of it is exactly what you said, is because of, I think a lot of people are afraid of money. And because, like you said, of the jargon and of the, the whole thing of, okay, I'm not really sure on how this thing called the market works, or am I going to lose money? Am I willing to take risk and so forth? So, and then when you couple that with exactly what you said about what a lot of us were socialized with money doesn't grow on trees, we're not made of money, and whatever the various cliches about money are, if you really look at it, it really always came from a negative perspective.
Right. Yeah, and that's just the thing. It's contagious. So the more people who are struggling for money raise more children who are afraid of money, who are start off struggling. And it's not so much that people from more I don't say poorer backgrounds, but people who come from less, the reason why they struggle is not so much because they don't start with, capital, with money in the bank to start investing with. I think the reason why they struggle mostly is because they start with the mentality, the mindset of someone who struggles. To them, that is normal. Struggle is perfectly normal because of where they live, because of their house, because of even their neighborhood. So that just becomes their normal mindset. And the things you learn as a child are especially difficult to change.
Right.
Because when we're young, we absorb information, at a really impressive clip. But that works both ways. Kids learn good things really quickly and absorb them in a really profound way, but they also absorb bad lessons in a really profound way. It becomes part of their identity. We are just, poor kids. Our family just struggled. We're a blue-collar family. We never had anything. And it becomes so deeply ingrained, it becomes difficult to uproot and change. And that's why some people, they just never do. They try for a while, they struggle for a while to try to break free, but, they never really do it.
Right.
And I think the real reason is because they never learn the language.
It is, and
terminology.
And like you just said, it's contagious both ways. The more you're constantly reinforcing what you don't have, the more you won't have. Exactly. And the more you're reinforcing where you're on your way to or what you intend to become, the more you're going to move toward that. And so, again, like you said, you could start, and this is, I think, another fallacy or another myth, like you just said. I think a lot of people think that in order to begin saving or investing, that you have to start with a lot. When the truth of the matter is, you could start putting maybe $1 a week in the bank, and over time, even that would build up. And you may think, $1 a week, that's nothing. Well, okay, and you may start off with that and then continuously build. It's $4 a month, but that $4 a month will now turn into something larger. I mean, even as kids, if you start saying, all right, let's invest 50 cents, let's save 50 cents a week or of your allowance or whatever. The point is, you would start wherever you are and build upon it.
Exactly. And once people start to learn the terminology, they start to learn things like you referred to before, compound interest. Albert Einstein once referred to compound interest as the most powerful force in the universe. The problem with compound interest for most of us, though, is compound interest is being used against most of us in terms of we're paying interest, on credit cards and loans and stuff like that. And that's why banks and credit card companies have the biggest buildings, because they understand compound interest. We pay them interest, and then we pay interest on the interest, and then they take our interest and loan to somebody else and collect on it again. Whereas wealthy people use compound interest to build their own investments. So once people learn how that works and how powerful it is, I think it makes a difference. And that, again, it just comes down to education. We need more people to read more books and to learn how that stuff works. And once they learn it, that's how they can start to replace those old bad ideas with better ideas. But if they don't read and they don't have somebody coaching them, it's really difficult. And that's my whole idea of writing the book, and for future books, is I try to write them in a way, in a conversational story-like way, so that people can read them without getting stuck in the jargon. And once they get their head and their mindset in the right direction, then they can start to pick up the terminology and add that to having the right attitude in the first place. And I think that'll make a difference.
No, absolutely right. And we're working our way up to the book, and we get ready to jump into it in a couple of minutes. But in terms of what you were just saying about how interest can be used against you, and it is used against you, that's why even making the minimum payment on a credit card really doesn't do you anything. If you send in just the minimum, you really aren't making a dent in your credit card, because that most of that is going toward the interest. And as a matter of fact, the credit card companies would prefer you to send in just the minimum. If you have a 20,
those cards paid off.
Right, you'll never pay the card off. But see, again, all of this is a part of kind of understanding how finance works. Now, the book is titled "Why Not You? The Old Man's Guide to Prosperity." Where did you come up with the title from?
Yeah, it's something I say to people all the time. When I'm talking to people, sometimes I get a sense that they're discouraged. They don't feel like, being prosperous is for them, which of course is not objectively not true.
Right.
But it's just something they've come to believe over time. It's just not for me. I'm never going to get there. And that's my response to them is always, why not you?
Exactly.
And the funny thing is, sometimes when you put it to people so bluntly, they can't answer that. They can't back up that it's just a feeling that it's not for them. But there's no logic, there's no rationality behind it. It's just a feeling of doom. You know what I mean? That they're destined to not have anything. So sometimes asking that question, why not you? I mean, people who look like you, who started like you, have gone on to do great things.
Right.
Why not you? What's wrong? There's nothing wrong with you.
Right.
In fact, I wrote a long post on my Facebook page about being realistic. It's not realistic to think that of all the people who have started from, humble backgrounds and done well, that you are the one person who just can't do it. I mean, that's just not realistic.
That's true.
And so I think that's it's an important point for people to understand. Yeah, it is completely realistic. You just have to do the work. You have to learn a little bit. You have to learn some terminology. But of course, it's for you. Why not you?
You know what? We were talking prior to going on the air, because for you, those of you in the listening audience, Art actually was probably my first guest blogger, or at least the first one I've had in a very long time. I honestly believe he's my first one. But Art did a guest blog post on my blog, The Critical Thinker, and I was sharing with him before we went on the air that I wanted him to come back again. And, he said, what topic you want me to write? I said, I don't tell the writers what topic. But now that you just said that, I might guide you in terms of writing something along those lines of what you were just saying. In terms of kind of write something along the line. You don't have to do it, but I'm just thinking now, based on what you just said, is, and you can promote the book at the same time. Like, why not you? Basically doing something on what you just said. Well, what is it that's keeping you from doing it? Or logically, there's no reason for you not to do it. Maybe you can do something along those lines, pretty much of what you just said, for the next blog post that the guests that you do for me. I mean, because I think that might be helpful for folks to kind of, well, wait a minute, I never thought about it that way. Because I tell you, it's a critical thinker. I never thought about, why can't I do it? Why couldn't it be me? So maybe something along those lines.
Exactly. I'd be thrilled to. Yeah, we say reality check. That's funny because I always think of reality check in a different way maybe than a lot of people. A lot of people will start something and have some difficulties, and they'll quit or they'll want to quit, and people say, well, you're just getting a reality check. To me, I have maybe the opposite thinking. The reality check is, wow, this could work.
Right.
This business may succeed. This investment may do well. This idea may actually be good. To me, my reality check is always maybe a little different than other people's. I'm always thinking in terms of a positive reality of the possibilities. And it doesn't matter how many times I fail or fall down. I don't really consider those to be failures. They're just stepping stones. It's just another step you take. And when you're going on a long journey, if you're hiking in the woods, every step you take is not going to be smooth. Some of them are, you're going to step on a rock, it's going to turn, you're going to step in a hole.
Right.
But there's still steps forward. And I think people need to start thinking in terms of every little difficulty you come into when you're trying to do something positive or good with your life. It's not necessarily a failure. It's just another step in the forward direction.
Now, in 2019, along this lines of trying to help folks with finances and understanding money and so forth, there are a lot of apps that have been introduced, and I actually downloaded a few of them, that allows you to do kind of like this. What do they call it whenever you do the small investing over time? Is the cost sharing or the
dollar cost averaging?
Yes, that's it. The dollar cost averaging. That's it. Bingo. I'm looking at apps like Acorn, Stash, Clarity, Robinhood, Capital, Albert. Like I said, I've downloaded a lot of them just to kind of play with them myself. They take out, and some of them, what they do is they actually deduct whatever change you have left from a purchase, and they throw that into account automatically for you. So are those things useful, especially for a child or someone younger who's just trying to get into the market, or is there any excuse for anybody not to at least attempt to understand money, given everything that we have available to us in 2019?
No, there really is no legitimate excuse. I have Acorns myself. I kind of like that one. Where they round up your purchases.
Right.
I think that's a pretty good app. It's a good start. Of course, now they have mutual funds and ETFs and things that you can also access online. Some of them for as little as $25 a month, where you can start, investing in a mutual fund and an IRA or something. So yeah, the resources are out there. But again, it comes down to fear.
Right.
I think really, if people are going to start investing, the first thing they should invest in is themselves and their knowledge. You need to start buying some books. You need to buy some books about how stocks work. Stocks are it's a very simple concept. Bonds are a very simple concept. Mutual funds are, again, a relatively simple concept. I think people need to start reading the books. Put your first few investment dollars into the books. And what the books will give you is the confidence and the knowledge to start doing other investments. Once you understand how those investments work, it's a lot easier to justify putting the money into them and start understanding, risk and stuff like that. So yeah, really, like you said, there really is no excuse nowadays, but it's just fear. There've always been avenues and way for average people to invest. Not as simple as today with the apps and all that, but there's always been ways for people to do it. It's always come down to fear, and people fear. They're so afraid of losing money that they never make any money.
Correct.
And I think educating themselves and understanding how those ups and downs work, especially with dollar cost averaging, which by the way is a brilliant concept for people to understand. And it's very simple. When you're putting the same dollar amount into an investment every month, if that investment goes down, instead of panicking and being upset, people need to realize that same dollar amount, when the value goes down, buys more of that investment. And then when the investment rises, the same dollar amount buys less of it. So it kind of builds in to the whole concept, the idea of buying low and selling high. You're buying more when it's cheap and less when it's more expensive. So just by that concept alone, dollar cost averaging really is a powerful thing for people to learn. And again, it's a simple concept. There's nothing, mysterious about it. It's just learning the terminology.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of stocks, a lot of us feel as if you're not buying a major company stock like a Coca-Cola or AT&T or Borden or Kraft or whatever the major companies are, that it's not worth it. If you're buying into like either an unknown company or either a small company or whatever, that's not worth it. Is there any validity to that at all?
Well, I think very few individual investors should be buying individual stocks in the first place, to be honest with you. They really should be diversified. And the way you can afford diversification on a small budget is through mutual funds.
Right.
Average mutual fund owns between 100, 120, 150 different companies. And I think the best way to explain diversification is, let's say you have a huge picture glass window in the front of your house. One of those great big, 8-foot by 4-foot windows in the front of your house. And, the kids are playing outside, they're playing baseball. And one of the kids knocks a baseball through that huge window. It's really expensive to fix, isn't it?
Correct.
But if you take that same window and it's divided into panes, with the wood going across and divided into 15 or 20 different little panes, and the same baseball goes through and breaks one of those little panes, fixing it is really not that big a deal because it's only one little square.
Right.
And you have all the other squares separated, not all together. And that's kind of how mutual funds work. So if one company in that mutual fund doesn't do well, all the other ones are still intact and doing well. So your risk is spread out among a bunch of different companies instead of just buying one stock. So like I said, I don't think individual investors should really be investing, or trying to pick stocks. I think that's where people go wrong. They try to day trade, they try to pick stocks, they try to figure out, the timing of the market, and I think that's a mistake.
Right.
We often tell people it's not a matter of timing, it's a matter of time in. In other words, staying in the market long enough for the cycles, the normal, natural ups and downs, to work your way back into up cycles. The market is pretty consistent over time. It's been an upward trajectory for 50, 60, 70 years. But people, because they don't study enough, they don't understand the cycles well enough, they have a tendency to do exactly what they shouldn't do. They buy in when the market's hot, and they panic and sell when the market's low. And to give you an idea, wealthy people do exactly the opposite. When that market tanked in 2008, a lot of people became very wealthy after that because while everybody else was panicking, wealthy people were scooping up all those shares because they understood that it's just a cycle. It's a cycle that and the market goes down and the market goes up. But like I said, once you understand how those cycles work, then you can. It's kind of like the weather. You can understand it's a storm, but it's not going to storm forever. You ride out the storm, and then when the weather's better, you're in better shape.
Now, for those of you in the listening audience, my guest who you're hearing and listening to is Art Merrill, and he's written the book, Why Not You? The Old Man's Guide to Prosperity. Now, your main character, one of your main characters is Tommy. Is Tommy loosely based on you? Yes, actually,
I'll let you in a little secret. I am both Tommy and the old man.
That's what I thought.
And look, some of your older listeners may enjoy this reference, but when I was a kid, my mother was a bartender, and my stepfather, when he came along, he was also a bartender. So I spent an inordinate amount of my childhood in bars, literally in bars. So I got to be really good at playing pinball. And I don't know if you remember the song from The Who, The Pinball Wizard. Tommy,
I do.
Pinball Wizard. So Tommy was my, that's who I...
That's where you got the name from.
Yes, sir. That's where Tommy came from. Pinball Wizard.
Well, as always, listening audience, and you heard Art say it a couple minutes ago in terms of investing in yourself and buying the books. Now, that was music to my ears. Because, one, it was the impetus of this show 18 years ago, was to try to encourage people to read more and invest in themselves by spending the time in reading as well as spending the few dollars on the books. Because to me, a book purchased is an investment. It's not a waste of money nor a waste of time.
Exactly.
It is an investment, exactly as you just heard Art say. And his book is Why Not You? And he has written it in what it's anyone who does reading or research, they will tell you, even in speaking or whatever, the best way to get a message across is in story form. For those of you who know anything about the Bible, you know anything about Jesus, Jesus taught in what was called parables, which was stories. All right. That is what Art has written. He's written a story that as you read through the story, you will learn about finances, but you will also learn about the importance of starting at a young age, but you will also learn about the importance of, as a youngster, taking in the wisdom from an elder, from someone who's older. And it's interesting. I don't want to tell you the whole thing, but we'll give you like a synopsis, but it is in Kindle form and paperback form. And again, very simple title. Why Not You? That's what caught my eye, by the way, Art.
Yes.
When I was like, okay, because I kind of asked myself that question, well, why not me?
It makes you think.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
It makes you think.
Like, well, you know what? He's right. Let me see what this is all about. So it's a very simple title. Why Not You? The Old Man's Guide to Prosperity. And the character is a young boy. In the beginning, Tommy was a little reluctant.
Yeah, I think a lot of kids don't really understand the importance of knowing about money because they're kind of cushioned from it. But I think if you're raised in a household where there's not so much money, I think it becomes more and more important to you. I think people who are raised in struggling households and prosperous households are raised a little differently. And I think sometimes, honestly, I think it might be a little bit of an advantage to be raised in a house where money is
right,
scarce and tight, as long as you don't internalize permanently that struggle, that identity of someone who struggles. But I think knowing what struggle feels like can be a really strong motivator, because on the flip side of people who struggle, growing up to be prosperous, there's also the dynamic of children who are raised in very prosperous households who are cushioned from the struggles of money, who end up not doing well because they never did struggle.
That's
they
correct.
Don't understand, yeah.
And see, again, another thing I like about the book is the fact that there's a relationships that develop between two different age groups. Actually, three different age groups, because as the story unfolds, Tommy's mom gets in there too.
Exactly.
So it's
exactly. I think.
Yeah, go ahead. It's three different age groups that's impacted there. So that was, I know it had to be by design, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's a shame. I think we don't talk generationally enough about money. And I think that's one thing that wealthy people do better than the rest of us. I often say that the way people think in terms of money has a lot to do with time frames. Okay, very poor think in terms of daily. Poor people think in terms of weekly. Middle class people think in terms of monthly. The wealthier, slightly prosperous, think more in terms of years. But the super wealthy think generationally.
Right.
And I think that's one thing we need to start absorbing and teaching our kids and our grandkids valuable money lessons when they're young, when their minds can absorb things like I was saying before, children are such sponges. I think we need to pay more attention to what we teach them when they're young. We teach them, right from wrong, of course, but I don't think it's a mistake to start teaching kids about money at a relatively young age, and not just the normal work ethic thing. That's important, but to start teaching them about the growth of money and about being an owner, being the boss, being an investor, not just being a hard worker. So, yeah, I think it's important that we do start to do that. We do start thinking in generational terms. When you start to think in generational terms, it helps you make better decisions today. When you start thinking, well, how will this purchase or how will this investment affect my kids and my grandkids, you start thinking differently and you make better decisions. So, yeah, I think it's really important that we start crossing those generations. I think for a long time in our society, we segregated the children. The kids sat at the kids' table,
right?
And the adults sat at the adult table, and the adults talked about adult stuff, and the kids talked about kid stuff. I was fairly fortunate in my childhood, as far as my grandparents went, is because I was one of the older of the grandchildren. I got to sit at the adult table at a relatively young age. I got to play, poker and sit at the adult table, listen to the adult conversations at a relatively young age. And I think that helped me start thinking more in terms of adult terms as far as money and things go, and as opposed to sitting at the kids' table. I think the idea of a kids' table is something that maybe we need to re-examine. I think we need to start including kids more in the conversations, not to stress them out about money or anything like that, but just to let them see what goes into those decisions, how we make those decisions so they can get better at making those decisions themselves. Like I said, when kids are young, they absorb lessons very well. I think we should pay more attention to the lessons that we're teaching them.
The point you just made about the view in terms of generational is critical in terms of being able to have something to pass forward. And in many instances, you have many families, and this, I don't know if it varies. I don't know, because based on how the country came about with slavery and the slave owners and who was able to accumulate wealth and pass on wealth and who didn't have wealth to pass on, so forth. Some of that is in the mix, but that's not all of it. To me, I still, to a degree, and it's going to sound terrible, kind of see that as an excuse, but I understand where it's coming from. But this whole notion of having something to pass down generationally is a key point. And even with, and I think the last blog, the latest blog post I wrote was, as much as I don't agree with Donald Trump on so many issues, the one thing I actually did agree with him on, and I know he didn't mean it that way, but the way that it could be taken was when he said the system is rigged. And where I'm going with it is the system is rigged to a degree in terms of if you have the means to pass something down generationally. And what brought me to writing that post was this whole scandal with the ability to pay for your child getting into these top-notch universities. Now, really what those, now, because I know those families per se was not necessarily thinking they were doing something illegal. In their mind, I think they were doing exactly what you just said in terms of thinking generationally. I want to set my child up to be able to do well so that they can continue passing along. So if I'm Bill Macy and I'm an actor and my child has now gone to Harvard and now they become the wealth rolls on. But see, again, that's back to thinking generationally versus weekly.
Right. Exactly. I think one thing that we can do a little differently, when I say we, I mean folks who come from more modest backgrounds and maybe some of these people in that scandal, is we can pass along knowledge and ability, and not just money. I think the mistake people make is they want to build their children up a big estate or a big pile of money, but not necessarily let the children share in the building of that prosperity in the first place and the knowledge that goes with it. And so, I think sometimes if that wealth has been in too many generations, that it becomes a sense of entitlement.
Right.
It leads to things like that scandal. I think we have to maybe be conscious of that balance of leaving our kids something, but not leaving them too much in terms of just financial power, but more in terms of financial knowledge.
That's an excellent point.
Kids, I think we've done well if we can get our kids to the point where even if we had a large, inheritance for them, that whether they actually receive that inheritance or not, they could rebuild their own prosperity from scratch if they had to, because we didn't just hand them the money, we handed them, they shared in the family business. We talked to them about investing. My kids all the time, if I'm making an investment or moving money somewhere, I talk to them about why I'm doing this, why I'm moving this money from here to there, why I'm making this investment, why I'm buying this piece of equipment. So I think it's, in generational terms, it's important that we leave our kids something, some kind of head start, so that they can, stand on our shoulders and go further, which is, I think, also an important concept. But also teach them how it was built. You don't just give them a house; you show them the blueprints.
Correct.
You show them how the construction was made, so that if something should happen to the house itself, they can rebuild it. I think sometimes wealthy people, for all their, thinking ahead, I think some of them skip that step.
Yes.
They hand their kids too much, and then when difficulties arise, the kids can't rebuild it because they didn't see the blueprints. So I think that's correct. An important distinction. And
that's the danger of this whole college scandal. Now, many of them did go on to do okay and did well, but some of the kids knew that their parents were doing it, and some of the kids didn't know. So now they're thinking they got in on their own merit when they really didn't. And that could set the child up for failure as well.
Yeah, that would backfire for sure.
Right. Now, some of the concepts and the principles you were just talking about is actually within the story. This whole notion of the equipment that's invested, because there was another piece of this book too beyond the money. Back to what I was saying about the relationship piece, because those of you not listening, when the book opens, the old man, if I remember correctly, because it's been a couple of months since I read it, his wife had passed away and he was on his own. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
So the old man, Tommy, actually filled, I guess where I'm going with this is, each one of them filled a need in each other beyond just the money piece.
Exactly. Yeah. The old man was getting to the point where him and his wife were childless. They had no children of their own.
Right.
And his wife passed. He started to understand that the wealth he had built wasn't really going to go to anybody, and more importantly, the lessons he had learned were not going to be passed on.
Right.
And that there was a dread there. There was a real fear of that. I think all of us want our life's work to mean something, to be passed on to the next generation. We want to be remembered and to have a legacy. And he got to the point where he realized that his legacy was basically going to be, the lonely old man who passed away and left a bunch of money to charity or to his estate or to, but his impact wasn't going to carry on. And that really bothered him, So when Tommy came along, he saw a way not to pass money on to, but to pass knowledge and hope for the future and prosperity onto the next generation. And of course, Tommy, with his father, not being in the picture anymore, really needed somebody who could take him by the hand and show him, this is how adult life works. And his mom was a single mom, like mine, so she was really busy, and she didn't have any real background in money either to teach him. So yeah, that was the premise, is they really needed each other. And it's tempting to just think, well, the kid needed, help. But really, I think the old man probably got as much out of the relationship as the kid did.
That's correct. And that's what came shining through for me in there, that not only did Tommy get help, the old man got helped also. But again, I'm going to go back to Mom, because by working with Tommy, Mom became educated too.
Exactly. And comes back to it being contagious. Not just the knowledge itself, but the feeling of everything just might be okay. I think that's probably, if you were going to encapsulate the whole idea of what I'm trying to convey, is everything will be okay. Everything will be okay if we just learn a little bit, we start at best, and we start heading in the right direction. It will be okay. I think that's one thing that's really missing in a lot of American families today, is the feeling that everything will be okay. Look, if you start investing today, you're not going to be rich tomorrow. It's kind of like, if you're on a vacation and you're on the highway and you're driving and maybe you haven't been paying attention for a little while, and all of a sudden you're not sure if you missed a turn or not, if you're going in the right direction. So for a little while, you're driving in a little bit of a panic.
Right.
You're not sure if you're going in the right direction. But then suddenly, you come across a sign that says, okay, well, this is your exit coming up in 1 mile. And from that point on, you're still in the same spot you were at, but now since you're going in the right direction, your entire mood and mindset and attitude changes, because like, aha, now I'm heading in the right direction. I saw the sign. And I think that's what I'm trying to get people to, that point, is where they understand that, yes, I'm going in the right direction. Everything will be okay. I think we need a lot more of that now.
I know that's right. I'm looking through your table of contents, and one of the chapters, or titles of the chapter, that jumped out at me was The Lottery Loser. And the reason that jumps out at me is because I have known people that played the lottery daily. And my question would be, think about if you put that same amount of money in some type of an account. The same money.
Exactly.
The same money. Whatever you're spending on, whatever, pick 3, pick 4, Powerball, whatever. If you're spending $20 a day or $15 or $5 a day on that, think about if you put that same amount into some type of an account. You're still spending it, whether you give it to the lottery person or whether you give it to the bank or the finance company or whatever. You're still so. But a lot of it is that whole notion of chance, and I might just, like, you got to be in it to win it. Not realizing that in the long run, you really do lose.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people who play lottery and things like that regularly, that was the whole point of that chapter, is they need to understand that no matter what, you will not win. In other words, first of all, the chance of you actually winning the lottery are, of course, astronomical. And like you said, that same money put away over a long period of time could actually be retirement-sized pile of money. It doesn't take, depending on, of course, now how old you are when you start, but that same little small investments every month or every week would add up. But the problem is even if you win the lottery, you are going to lose the money.
Right.
You're not going to know what to do with it, because if you don't know to invest that money instead, then you certainly don't have the investment knowledge to handle a big pile of money all at once. Does that make sense? It's like handing somebody a loaded gun without any
training, right?
They're going to shoot themselves. There's no way. So I think people need to understand that. Well, if I win the lottery, I'll be all set. No, you won't. In fact, they've done a lot of studies, and most people, I'm not sure what the exact percentage is, but I think it's 80-something percent.
They lose it all back, right?
They lose it all back and end up in worse shape than before, because they borrow, which is, when you think about that, as an astounding idea. You win millions of dollars and you end up in debt.
Right.
How does that make any sense?
We had one here in New Jersey years ago. His name was Curtis Sharp. He was right here in New Jersey, a couple towns over, a couple cities over from me, and it happened to him.
Yep. Yeah, there was an article. In fact, you can probably Google it. How winning the lottery ruined my life. And it's,
correct.
And there's story after story of people who end up in worse shape. So really, why are you playing the lottery? If you lose, you lose, and if you win, you lose. Just like you were saying, that was very good advice. Take that money that you were going to spend on lottery tickets, or, God forbid, even cigarettes. Put that money in a little envelope. Take it away for the end of the month. At the end of the month, put it in a mutual fund. Right. You know, you can get help online finding a good mutual fund. Put that money away, even if it makes 2% a year. It makes 0% a year. If it just adds up,
right,
you'll be doing better than giving it to the lottery.
Right. And then, before we go, I want to talk a little bit about this whole notion, because it's the chapter right after, of passive versus active income.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing for people to start working towards. In other words, when you work for money, you can only work so much and make so much money. And, of course, eventually we all get old. As much as we would all think that's not going to happen. We all eventually get old enough where that same physical work becomes difficult or impossible. So it's important while we're working to start putting some money into passive investments, things that pay money whether or not we work. Of course, stocks and mutual funds are one way, businesses or another, and even stuff like writing books. Of course, my book's not on the bestseller list or anything yet. It's not really an income source right now, but eventually it may be.
It will be.
And thank you. And royalties and licenses and patents and stuff like that. People, it's what people start thinking outside of the box and think about things that will bring money to them, whether or not they physically work. Because at some point, like I said, that physical work becomes difficult or impossible. So, and in fact, there's a chapter in the books called "Assets Are in the Eye of the Beholder," and that's the basic idea. Is there's so many different ways to make money with money, and sometimes it just comes down to looking around you, looking for a need, and filling that need. But eventually, those investments have to be passive. They have to return money to you, whether or not you're working.
Right.
So I think comes down to education, figuring out what types of things you can do, and start investing in those things now so they have time to grow while you're still working.
Now, this is coming full circle into one of the things we talked about earlier in the interview, whenever I said, not only did you learn it for yourself, but it came upon you to share with others so that they can do well also. There's a chapter in the book that says the importance of giving. Talk about that.
I think there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, obviously spiritual reasons for giving, but I think the most fundamental reason I think it's so important for people to give is because when you give, you're helping other people. You're spreading that generosity also. Like everything else is contagious. They say when you walk into a room, you smile, people smile back. Well, if you're the giving kind of person, then you encourage other people to give also. But I really think one of the most important reasons for people to give back is because it tells you internally that you have plenty.
Right.
You are prosperous. More will come to you. You can give and still have plenty. And I think when you do that, when you start setting yourself up for that process, of I can go ahead and give, I can help other people, and I will still have plenty for myself. I think that helps you to actually have more and to become more prosperous, because it's a mindset, and I think also, and even in very real terms, when people see that you're a generous and giving person, they don't feel any hesitation to do business with you.
Correct.
In a very literal sense. They understand you're the kind of person that if they do business with you, some of that money is going to help other people, as opposed to going to some giant corporation, to some shareholders, maybe even in another country. So I think there's a practical part of it, but I think it changes you. When you decide to become a giver, I think it elevates you to a way that bigger and more prosperous things become realistic to you, because you're a giver, because you're the kind of person who can do those things. Your sense of deserving also increases. Like, well, you know what? If I get that project, or if I get that investment, or if I get that business, I'm the kind of person that will use up some of that for the benefit of other people. So I deserve that business. And when you have the attitude of deserving it and being the kind of person that should have, access to that prosperity because of how you will handle it, I think it's a really powerful thing. On the flip side of that is, if you decide that, well, I don't have any to spare, I can't help anybody right now, even if you're just starting out, there's things you can do.
Correct.
I don't want people to think that they have to wait till they're prosperous, then they can turn around and start helping people. You can help people right now. There's a single mom you may know who maybe needs a few hours of babysitting on a given day, so they can, work a few, extra shifts or something. Or, there's an elderly neighbor, maybe you can cut their grass for them or carry their groceries for them. There's a lot of little things you can do as far as giving that will help you start to feel more prosperous, even before that prosperity, actually manifests itself.
Absolutely. And I'm looking here at the final page of the book. It says, if you help enough people, the money will be there. Lesson: when we share what we know, we all grow.
Exactly. And I think that's really the fundamental premise of everything I'm trying to do is we all do better when we all do better.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes. Here's the thing. If we help other small businesses grow and do better, those people who own those businesses will have more money to participate in our business and to buy things from us. And that money can circulate a little better. The more it grows, especially among the working class folks, the more there is for everybody else. So I think that's a fundamental premise, is to help each other, because when we all do better, we all do better.
That's right. Well, we're down to the point in an interview where I shut the mic off and you have the opportunity to promote. You can promote your Facebook page, your websites, the book, Why Not You, Primerica, whatever. You can do anything with the exception of saying a dollar amount. Everything else is fair game, with the exception of a dollar. That folks can work that out with you when they contact you. But as far as how to reach you, contact you, get your book, your services with Primerica, whatever, this is your opportunity to promote.
Okay, thank you very much. I won't say too much about Primerica. That's
right. I understand.
To look that up on a local basis. But as far as my book goes, you can find it on Amazon.com. And soon, I'm hoping the next month or so, I'll have my second book, which will be called Lessons from the Gutter. That's going to be more of a small business thing. And my Facebook page, if you search at Art Merrill 1, you'll get my Why Not You Facebook page, which isn't really based on the book necessarily, but it's just more of a, I don't want to say daily, but not necessarily every single day. I post things on there, inspirational, motivational things, just sometimes people they go there in the morning and just get a little message to help them kind of get started with the day. But other than that, you can get the book on Amazon.com. You get the Kindle version. It's very cheap, very affordable. And I just want to thank you again for having me on. I really do appreciate the chance to talk about my book, and especially talk about prosperity, because I think that's really something we all need to do more. We need to speak more openly about money and about prosperity, about having more. I think sometimes we the subject can be a little taboo, and I think that's a shame. I think we need to speak more openly with each other and out in public about, having more so that we can all have more.
I agree. Now, on your Facebook page, is it like a blue W? Is that in your, where it says, why not you? Yeah. And it's a blue W?
Yes, sir. That's me.
Okay. So I'm liking your page right now then as we speak.
Thank you.
I'm liking.
Yeah. And honestly, that big blue W, that's just the standard thing they give you when you don't. I tried to put some pictures on there. I'm so technologically illiterate, I wasn't able to do that. But then I kind of got to liking the big W, so I just left it.
Well, you know what? I took it as the WNY. I took it as in the word Y. That's the way I took it as. So I kind of figured you did it on purpose. So if you don't tell anybody, we won't know. So I truly enjoyed speaking with you. We will definitely stay in touch. I know, like I said, we kind of hit each other back and forth on Twitter on our different tweets that we put out there. Again, you feel free to join me and guest blog on my blog, The Critical Thinker. Let me know when the new book is out. We'll have you back on. We'll talk about that one.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that very much, Mark. Thank you.
All right. So I tell you what, I could not agree with you more in terms of so many things we talked about this morning from the standpoint of giving and sharing and the information and buying of books and investing in yourself. I could not agree with you more on so many of the things. And those in the listening audience, again, the book is Why Not You? So really easy title. Like he said, if you go to Amazon, it will pop. If you Google it, it will pop. It's Art, ART, Art Merrill. All right, Art. He called all the way in from Louisiana. You're in Central Time?
Yes, sir. I'm an hour behind you.
So you're an hour behind me. Okay, so it's about 8 o'clock my time, about 7 o'clock your time. When we started, it was 6 o'clock your time then.
And time has flown by. And I just want to say one more thing. I appreciate you pronouncing my name correctly without coaching and without any mistakes. I think you may be the first person ever to do that.
Wow. And I tell you, because you know what, names, and I tell people this all the time in the schools, names are extremely important to me for a couple of reasons. One, that's the thing that we hear most often. Out of everything that we do and that we hear from other people, our names are what we hear most of. The other reason I'm extremely sensitive to it is because my name begins with a C, M-A-R-C. And most people take it for granted or assume it's M-A-R-K. So I'm kind of like, just like you just did, whenever I see people notice that it was a C instead of a K, I appreciate that just as well. And so I'm very sensitive to it. And I also believe in people need to understand the meanings behind their names. Like I have known people like your name, Art. I've known people whose name was Art, and they actually became art dealers. They were artists or either art dealers. They had a shop, they had a painting shop or whatever, and their name was Art. And like my name is Medley, and I also play the piano. People ask, is that your stage name? No, that's my real name. But we hear our names the most. Now, think about this for a minute, Art. What you're doing as a writer is art.
Exactly. And and to be blunt, it's the only type of art I have any ability at all. I can't draw a stick figure. See,
but I mean that falls, literature and books and all that falls under the arts. So I mean, we really do subconsciously or subliminally, in some form or fashion, becomes in many cases what our names are. I'm literally, and I'm not making this up. There's a doctor up. His name is Doctor.
Wow.
And I'm not making it up. It's just Doctor.
I think that's actually one major concept that we can leave the listeners with is children especially live up to down to what you expect of them and what you teach them.
That's
so
correct.
If we can teach them to do better, in terms of prosperity at least, I think if we put the expectation in them as a younger age, I think we'll see a lot more of it instead of expecting, setting the expectation of we can't afford it and money doesn't grow on trees. If we put in their heads a different expectation, I think we'll get it.
You're absolutely right. So I tell you what, have a wonderfully blessed day, my friend. Blessed week, blessed month, blessed year.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you very much, and we'll talk again.
Yes, we will.